Hello and welcome. I'm Ali Mustafa and you're watching a special edition of Strait Talk. It's been almost a week since Turkey launched an operation in Syria's Afrin region against the YPG terror group. FSA fighters backed by Turkish soldiers have made significant gains in the north. They've captured 16 strategic points from YPG militants. Most of the fighting is now concentrated in the Basraya mountains near Azaz. It's where the Turkish military says some of its soldiers were killed. Turkish forces say they have also killed at least 260 YPG fighters. Global reactions to Turkey's operation in Afrin have so far been mixed, as Ömer Kablan explains.
Just days into Operation Olive Branch, Turkey is advancing deeper into Afrin. Their goal is to eliminate the PKK terror group's Syrian affiliate, the YPG, from its border and to establish safe zones. The global reaction has been swift and varied.
We would call on, certainly on the Turks, to not take any actions of that sort. Focus needs to be on ISIS. So we don't want them to engage in violence, but we want them to keep focused on ISIS.
In relation to the role of the Kurds in further political process, a role must be secured. Striving to understand the motivation behind such Washington policy, there's nothing left but to assume that this is either a lack of an understanding of the situation there or a deliberate provocation.
The continuation of the current situation could lead to a return of terrorists and extremism to Syria. This is to the betterment of neither Syria nor its neighbors.
While we understand the concerns Turkey currently has about its border security, we can only call on Turkey to show the greatest possible restraint on this issue.
The Turkish armed forces say they've killed more than 260 YPG terrorists. And Ankara has reported several casualties from the incursion. Speaking at the funeral of one of the Turkish soldiers who had died, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said no one can stop the military action.
Acaba şunlar ne demiş, bunlar ne demiş, dünyada şu ülke nasıl bakmış, bu ülke nasıl bakmış? Buna bakacak halimiz yok. Bu konudaki karar bu milletindir. Ve bizi sınırlarımızda taciz eden 3-5 tane ipsize, soysuza biz bu sınırlarda soluk aldırmayız.
Washington has aided the YPG in Syria, which has caused deep tension with Turkey. But US State Secretary Rex Tillerson said that they hope to work with Turkey to create security zones in northwestern Syria. It's a position Turkey has called for since the early stages of the Syrian war, especially when it comes to protecting civilians. After Afrin, Turkey says its next move will be towards YPG-held Manbij, just over 100 kilometers to the east. Undeterred by the global response, Turkish officials continue to say that they will respond to what they deem security threats. Ömer Kablan, Strait Talk.
And to discuss this further, I'm joined by Saadet Oruç from Ankara. She's a senior advisor to the Turkish President Erdogan. Thank you for joining us, Saadet. As far as you're concerned, sitting in Ankara, how is the operation in Afrin unfolding?
Yes, it's now the fourth day of the operation, and it's a very successful operation of Turkish army against the presence of PKK and PYD terrorists in northern parts of Syria. So it seems that the goals of the operation will be reached step by step. And despite our martyrs, 3 martyrs following the operation, which were attacked by the PYD PKK members, we have been observing a success in the ground, and Turkey will continue the operation until the final goal will be achieved, which is the cleaning of the territory from terrorists, to secure the Turkish border and to bring stability and welfare to the people living in this city.
Let's pull back a bit and talk about global reactions, especially from the United States. Now, we've seen the U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson say that we're in discussions with the Turks and some of the forces on the ground, as well as how to stabilize the situation and meet Turkey's legitimate concerns for their security. On the other side, you have James Mattis, the U.S. Defense Secretary, saying that Turkey is a NATO ally. It's the only NATO country with an active insurgency inside its borders, referring to the PKK, and Turkey has legitimate security concerns. But on the other side, the flip side of this is coming from the White House, where Sarah Sanders, the White House press secretary, says we urge Turkey to exercise restraint in its military actions and rhetorics. There seem to be mixed messages coming as far as the public is concerned from the US. Are you getting these mixed messages as well in Ankara, Saadet?
Yes, last week we have observed just before the start of the operation, we have seen more mixed messages, in fact, from Washington. And following the statement by Ryan Dillon, the spokesman of the International Coalition Against Daesh, who stated that an army will be established from the PYD members consisting of 30,000 PYD terrorists, of course, according to the United States statement. We have observed following that statement, we have observed very mixed messages. In fact, they just, I think they played with the words. And this week also, there are mixed messages, but I think Rex Tillerson, U.S. Secretary of State, he gave very logical answers concerning the will of Turkey to build a secure zone in the area, and he stated that the United States might work with Turkey on this issue also. Pentagon, White House, and State Department, they've been giving mixed channels. I think there is a lack of consensus perhaps in Washington, and if we just think about the legitimate defense of Turkey for its security, in fact there is no place for mixed messages, and if you just look at the situation, look at the ground, I think there should be no discussion on the goal of the Turkish army for its operation in Afrin. And I think that in the final analysis, Washington, if they will start to think logically and just if they will consider the realities of the ground, they will find the right answer concerning their mixed messages, I think.
Well, this is your expectation that Washington will think logically when it comes to Turkey's offensive in Afrin, but has this been communicated by President Trump to President Erdogan and vice versa?
Look, Turkish position is very clear, and all the levels of Turkish state, from president to the army and to the government, there is one single position. But when it comes to the United States, we expect more stable and more logical position from Washington also. And I think that President Trump will be more involved in the Afrin issue today, following his conversation with President Erdogan.
So that's one side of it, but there's another significant side to this as well, the Russian side. And we saw President Erdogan speak to Russian President Vladimir Putin on Tuesday. What was the discussion there like? And Russia's role, can you also amplify what Russian assistance and acquiescence has meant to Turkey's stated position and the operation in Afrin?
Russia considers Turkey's sensibilities in a stronger way than the position of the United States. So the discussion between President Putin and President Erdogan was something very positive. Then they took the considerations of each side into account, I think.
And finally, what about Turkey's position on Bashar al-Assad specifically? Will Ankara be okay if Syrian regime forces take over Afrin from the YPG?
Turkey respects to the territorial integrity of Syria. Here there is a position of Turkey to clean the city from terrorists, and Syrian regime failed to take the control of these cities.
Saadet Oruç, thank you for joining us from Ankara. This latest offensive into Syria has united political parties within Turkey. Some are letting go of past differences in backing Operation Olive Branch and to show solidarity in Turkey's fight against the PKK-linked YPG. Adil Halim reports.
They're usually at different ends of the political spectrum. But when it comes to securing Turkey's borders, the vast majority of the country's lawmakers are on the same side. Opposition party leaders have voiced support for Turkey's ongoing military operation in northern Syria, aimed at eliminating terrorist groups nested in the region. The head of the opposition CHP party says the Afrin ground incursion was inevitable, and Turkish troops are maintaining Syria's territorial integrity.
Turkey's border security is extremely important. Our location forces us to pay attention to it, and in light of that, Operation Olive Branch has become inevitable. Our heroic soldiers are continuing their fight. Our main desire is for them to complete their mission and safely return home.
The MHP also supports the mission.
Our heroic army is not alone. Many others are waiting to join them to defend the nation. The government is not alone. The Nationalist Movement Party is on its side.
The MHP offers endless credit and support to the AKP in order to end terrorism. For this reason, the MHP will not allow a terrorist organisation to set up a state along its southern border. That's why the MHP is backing the Afrin operation as part of the Turkish nation. It's beyond politics.
The only major political opposition to the operation is from the HDP, a predominantly pro-Kurdish party linked to the PKK. Meanwhile, public support has been seen at several rallies along the Turkish border. As the mission continues, Turkey's military says only terrorists are being targeted and utmost importance is being given to minimize civilian harm. Adil Halim, Strait Talk.
And to discuss this further, I'm joined in the studio by Faruk Luolu, who is a former Turkish ambassador to the US, and by our very own journalist Salim Atalay, who's been on the show before. Thank you so much for being here. Let me begin with you, Ambassador. Now, you were also a long-time member of the CHP, which is in the opposition right now, and we've known CHP and the AK Party have had differences in the past on a variety of issues. How important is it to unite for political groups when a military operation like this takes place on the Syrian border?
Well, I think this is a reflex deeply ingrained in Turkish culture. And you can put it in two ways. One is when the issue is national, everybody unites behind that position taken by the government, whoever it might be in power. The second, which is perhaps more visible and concrete, is when Mehmetçik, the Turkish soldier, is on stage, everybody falls in line behind him. And this is what happened. As soon as the Turkish soldiers, Mehmetçik, crossed into Syria, even when the Turkish jets started bombarding Afrin targets, I think the Turkish public, irrespective of their differences, political differences over other issues, all parties, including CHP, supported this operation, clearly for very obvious reasons. This was to secure Turkey's borders, to clean the area of terrorist groups, and to prevent the formation of a YPG, continuous strip of land across northern Syria. Of course, after the achievement of these objectives, the idea is to put people back in there to live in safety.
This is a very interesting point that the ambassador raises, Salim, to return Syrian refugees to any future safe zone, which is also one of the stated objectives. Does the political consensus reflect consensus among the public on the ground, Salim?
Yes, of course. It's the security. That's the primary issue, is the security of the border, security of the nation. And we know that something adverse going on the other side of the border. Syria is ungovernable, that territory is ungovernable, and some terrorist groups are taking advantage of it and waiting for their time to attack. That they're not going to stay over there. We knew that. So there's a pressure towards the border. There's pressure towards Hatay region, and in addition, we have an ally who is arming this group, a NATO ally who's arming this group, and seems to be contradicting.
I guess it's a very complicated picture for Turkey.
Yes.
It's a very complicated picture for Turkey as far as both external and internal dynamics are concerned. You've got the PKK inside, you've got the YPG there, but also internally, you've got the MHP, which is against the settlement of Syrians or the absorption of these 3 million Syrian refugees. So do you think there's some sort of carrot and stick, political carrot and stick here that is at work?
I don't think so. Refugees, or the Syrian refugees in Turkey, are guests, and they're not here to stay. If they prefer to stay,
yeah, but there was talk of integrating them, giving them citizenship. There has been talk of that.
Sure, probably Mrs. Merkel has the same idea, or any other European country who is allowing refugees in, or any general refugee policy requires that. Nations sometimes need external refugees to beef up their population. Yes, that's being done. Maybe Turkey is facing a de facto situation. But back to the political consensus, the reason is twofold. One is the security concerns. The second is the deteriorating situation in Syria, the ungovernable territories. And third is the US factor, an ally who seemingly has turned against Turkey. So if anything, the US factor is also uniting the Turkish people against...
It's interesting that you raise it because Ambassador here has served as a diplomat, as Turkey's top diplomat in the United States, and you were, according to Salim earlier, we were talking about it, you were known as the hawk.
Not on all issues, but
do you think Turkey needs a more hawkish approach when it comes to the United States on this issue? Even more hawkish?
Turkey needs to be hawkish on its national issues and national interests. We don't really have a real interest in confronting all powers of the world, be it Russia or the United States. We need good relations with all of them. But standing for your own interests and for your own principles, fine. But even today, I think President Erdogan is going to talk with President Trump. And despite all these differences, especially over YPG, I think Turkey and the US do have a chance to come together, to converge their interests at some point.
Yeah, but what would you say to critics that say that maybe Turkey has been too accommodating of its American NATO partners?
Well, it depends on what subject you are talking about. I think...
specifically on YPG and the growth of the YPG.
Turkey has been patient. I think the US policy on Syria has been wrong, as has been Turkish policy on Syria that has been wrong for a number of years. Now Turkey is making an effort to mend its Syrian policy, its Syrian position. But I think the last straw that broke the camel's back was the US decision to create this 30,000 YPG-centered border security force. Despite all the warnings from Turkey, which went unheeded in the US, in Washington.
Well, they've been backtracking on it as well. There's confusion coming from the
But I think basically they still regard YPG as their main ally in Syria, not just in the fight against ISIL, but also generally and in broader terms. They invest their trump cards in the Syrian Kurds, while Russia invests its cards in the Assad regime, and Turkey opposes both of them.
How does this play out in Turkey? This American support for a group that is a prescribed terrorist organization as far as Turkey. What do the people think about this, Salim?
They are very angry. They are very angry that a NATO ally, our primary ally, is aligning with a bunch of whatever, I don't want to use the word, and then arming them to their teeth. And then if the idea is running them against ISIL, sure, every country has the right to use its own mercenaries and their tools. But if the ISIL is over, which is interestingly not being announced yet, where's ISIL in Syria is the question. And then continuing to arm them, and then continue to arm them despite a promise by President Trump to President Erdogan that the arm flows will be stopped. I'm afraid no one listens to President Trump these days. So a CENTCOM that is running its own show, and border security force or border force which border? We are talking about the Turkish border. We are talking about a NATO ally border.
It's a NATO border.
It's a NATO border, and you are trying to subvert this NATO ally from the other side of the border with this force. It's just inconceivable, and it's also in shambles that the U.S. policy is in this situation.
Ambassador,
Yes.
have U.S.-Turkey ties reached a point of no return first, and then how does Russia and Iran fit into Turkish policy moving forward?
No, the Turkish-American relations have not reached a point of no return. Very serious difficulties, which will eventually be, as far as I'm concerned, be resolved. It will take time, patience, and good diplomatic work. As far as Russia and Iran are concerned, I think circumstances and policies of different actors, especially of the U.S., have pushed Turkey to cooperate more fully with both Russia and Iran, which is not a bad thing, so long as it serves to bring peace and stability to Syria. But I think Turkey must be beware of its relations, especially with Russia. I always support very strong cooperation between Iran and Turkey as regional powers, because that develops into regional ownership of the issues of the region.
There's one aspect to it, the external dynamics, but internally we're talking about a consensus, a widespread consensus, but not everyone is on board.
And not everyone is on board, for instance, towards maintaining relations with the United States. There's some reaction on why President Erdogan is still talking to Trump. There's very massive reaction on why Turkey is still dealing with the U.S. So there's reaction on that side. It's very interesting. Turkey was not as angry as like this as before. Now, back to square one, there's too much history. Just very recent statements I think matter more. One is, yes, they've given up on this border force. Number two, promises needs to be kept about these weapons. No one is very much hopeful about how they'll be recollected, but yes, let's see the attempt a little bit. And then the third thing, how to govern Syria is not a matter of arms and occupation, but there's political process going on. There's talk about Astana, there's talk about Sochi, there's talk about Geneva. So let's see what the actors are doing in that sense. And one maybe positive signal was from Secretary Mattis, Defense Secretary. He called Turkey as our NATO ally. That's given, okay. And he called the other group as tactical cooperation, our tactical cooperation with the YPG.
Well, you raised an interesting point. I want you to take your diplomat cap off and put your CHP cap on for a second. Can we expect this consensus? We saw Kılıçdaroğlu, the opposition leader, CHP leader, stand with Prime Minister Yildirim, together showing a united front. Can we expect this consensus, this political consensus, to go beyond military operations?
Probably not. It depends on exactly what happens with the military operations. Because so far, as you said earlier in your program, the international reaction has been mixed. And generally mild. Almost everybody recognizes the right of Turkey to defend itself. And this is specified in the UN Charter, Article 51, legitimate self-defense and so forth. Also the fight against terrorism. But all have also expressed concern about the duration and scope of this operation, including collateral damage to civilians. So I think the government probably had an excellent entry strategy, but it must have an equally good, solid exit strategy in order to reap the benefits of this.
Salim, I'll give you the last word.
Still, the targets are obvious, and the Turkish nation is united against common threat, which is very obvious, and sacrifices have been made. They will continue, and also you just mentioned things are still being shuffled in the area. So alliances, ad hoc tactical cooperation, and shifting balances. The United States rediscovering its own ally, NATO ally. So things are still developing. So I'm sure every player is guarding their own national interest. America first, and sure, Turkey first is on the side of the border. And there's talk about President Trump talking to Mr. Erdogan on telephone very soon. So let's see what happens. Military operation continues. Turkish nation support is there, and alliances are still being reshuffled.
Salimat Alay, Ambassador Lulolu, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that's all for this special edition of Strait Talk with me, Ali Mustafa. If you've got any comments or suggestions, do share them with us at #StraightTalk. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Next time, we'll continue our special coverage on Turkey's border operations in Syria. Until then, take care and goodbye.